Everyone, it's Roger here from What's On at DisneyPlus.com. I'm here with Emily, who is the composer of the upcoming Searchlight Pictures film All of Us Strangers, which is coming out in cinemas in December and January, depending on where you live. Emily, first off, could you give us a little bit of an introduction on how you kind of got into making music for films?
So I guess I have the very average start of taking piano lessons at home with a piano teacher for quite a few years, and then realizing that, experimental pop music is more, is something for it that attracted me maybe a little bit more than classical for a while, especially artists like Björk or Radiohead and the way they were creating little sound worlds in every one of their songs and sculpting the sounds further than harmony or orchestration. It was so detailed. And therefore, I wanted to go and do a university course that was also integrating studio time and studio composition and, looking at pop music as well and music business. And the university where I did that happened to have a big film school. Loads of film students, and I was a film nerd also growing up, and it turned out that quite a few of my friends were filmmakers and we had a lot in common, and they were the one asking, like, would you like to do film scores for short films, which I loved doing. I really, really enjoyed the collaborative aspect and the storytelling aspect, and that's what got me hooked. And then I spent the following years both developing my own practice, trying to find my sound, the way I like to use instruments, and just waiting for the right projects to get started properly. And the past 5 or 6 years, I've been very lucky to work on films that I could, really be proud of.
That's cool. Where did the inspiration come from for the music behind All of Us Strangers?
It comes from, I would say, the reactions I had the first time I saw a cut of the film, because I came on board at doing the edit rather than doing the script level, and watching both the subtlety and the delicate nature of Andrew Scott's performance, but also the boldness of all the complexity of the timeline, the amount of suspension of disbelief it expected from the audience. But so it's such a difficult to explain film. It's such a specific film, but I knew that at the core of it there was a lot of truth to it. So I thought the music should be as subtle as the film itself, but it should also have moments where it goes into genre element of sounds that are a little bit more challenging, a little bit more scary, and have an emotional depth, but not in an overly lyrical or super emotive way, because we have characters who are quite restrained in their emotion, and so that really influenced the kind of more restrained composition. And in terms of sounds, it was, well, synthesizer made sense in a way also because we have songs that are from the 80s and they are synth heavy, but I didn't want the synths to be nostalgic or to be retro in any way. And then one thing that I personally really wanted to do was to have live instruments as well. So I ended up having 2 cellos, 2 violin, and me on the piano. But then, we were talking with the director on how those instruments are lovely because they bring so much humanity and emotion in the playing, but we didn't want the audience to recognize them too easily, because then, it just has too many preconceived ideas that you associate with those instruments. So I spent quite a bit of time working with different effect chains and granular synthesis, and just to try to find a way to twist the sound enough that it wasn't immediately recognizable, but still kept that emotional impact of having players. And keeping the score quite intimate, because it is there's 4 characters really in this film. So it just felt right to have 4 kind of core instrument groups to represent them to a certain extent.
That sounds cool. It's, I mean, like the trailer itself is very, like you say, like kind of pulling in on like the 80s vibe, and as being an 80s kid, instantly kind of like felt into all of that. But what's been one of your highlights working on the film?
Well, it's a mix of two things. I was a fan of the director, so it was great to be, trusted to become a collaborator, and it was a very collaborative process. So that, all the way until being allowed to spend 7 days in the sound mix at the end and really integrate my music rather than just, being asked to stay off. But also, it's been wonderful as well to see the film with an audience and to know that it's touched people. Some people because it's really, really close to home in terms of the queer element of the storyline. Some people because they recognize their difficulty in their relationship with their parents or the difficulties of grieving. It's just seeing the way it deeply touches people and being able to work on a film that deeply affects people who watch it is just such a privilege.
That's very interesting with the whole like aspect, like I said, different angles and stuff. What was your biggest kind of challenge working on the soundtrack?
It was how do you make something that is still emotional but brings you into Adam, because he's a character that is, especially at the start of the film, is how do you make sure that his deep desire for connection is present even at moments where he's closing himself to the world. So how to have a warmth and invite people into the story, and finding a balance between something that's not intrusive, that doesn't feed people any emotion, but still makes you drift off into his world. So yeah, just finding the sound palette and how far you can push melody, how far you can push emotion without being manipulative. That was an interesting balance. And also you have moments where you go into territory that gets a little bit scarier or a little bit darker, but you don't want to make it a horror score, which I love making horror scores, but this was not the project. So it's just tonally, it's subtle, but it has to be right. And yes, finding that balance was tricky.
That's so interesting, like you say, like with the balance of how it all comes together. I'm going to ask you, how long did it kind of take you to put together the score for the film?
I think, trying to think, it's difficult because I don't remember exactly. 5 months, 4 months probably. We had like a few changes of edit and tweaks in that were more editing, but I would say 4 months to do the score itself.
That's cool. How did you kind of go about the approach of creating it? Was there a lot of research, like you say, like with it being a lot of 80s stuff in there?
No, it was quite interesting because there was no real reference music in terms of we want to emulate this or that. It was just, even the 80s song thing was more of a let's be mindful that it wouldn't be jarring, but without trying to emulate it in any way. We're not trying to make a nostalgic or period score in any way. So the research was genuinely more in terms of crafting sounds, a selection of sound, a palette of sound that I could use throughout the film that would have enough variation to cover all the different emotions that we're trying to cover, still feel cohesive as a whole, and the right amount of effect on live instrument and all of that. I think that was the longest part of the process, just getting all those colors to paint with, and then you can start properly writing to picture.
That's good. Yeah, really looking forward to like listening to it fully, because I tend to listen to soundtracks constantly while I'm working. It kind of in fact, if my Spotify thing came out, my Wrapped came out later today, and literally top thing was movie soundtrack and movie scores. It's like that's just what I love to listen to kind of concentrate. But as my final question, a little bit more fun side of things, if obviously Disney's own Searchlight Pictures, are there any other like Disney owned franchises that you'd like to maybe take a stab at in the future?
Oh, it's scary to say out loud. I wouldn't mind doing something to do with the Star Wars universe if they were doing something slightly more poetic and atmospheric, but yeah, it feels quite scary to put that out there.
Yeah, we got a bit of that there. But again, thank you so much for taking your time out to speak to us today. And as I said, All of Us Strangers comes out in cinemas in December and January, depending on where you live. And obviously, it'll be coming to Disney Plus in 2024. But again, thank you so much for taking your time out to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking to me.